In Richard Brody's review of Damien Chazelle's First Man, Brody writes, Chazelle has made a historical film in which the historical element is so grossly distorted as to detach the hero from humanity. The world in which Neil functions is lunar in its isolation. The few and narrow traits that he's assigned make him a cardboard cutout, a living poster man of bygone American heroism. I completely disagree with the negative connotations of this statement. In 2018, Damien Chazelle returned to the big screen for the first time since La La Land with First Man. Following thematic ideas raised in his previous efforts, First Man is focused on a man determined to achieve his vision despite the rest of the world telling him otherwise. For most viewers, Neil Armstrong is an American myth. We know a sanitized and accepted interpretation of his story, but we're unaware of the genuine truth. First Man's portrayal of Neil Armstrong is a unique one. He's not at all how we thought he would be. He's quiet and borderline stoic, never really expressing himself in an emotional manner. In fact, one would argue that he does indeed start the film as the living poster man of bygone American heroism. Take the opening scene for example. We watch as Armstrong tests out the X-15 plane for NASA to so-so results. By opening the film with a heart-pumping sequence, Chazelle sucks the viewer in, almost tricking them into expecting a by-the-numbers tale of American patriotism. However, directly following this, we witness the genesis of what the filmmaker longs to achieve with this movie. He wants to deconstruct the myth of Neil Armstrong. Now look, the story of how the US landed on the moon is a grand and fascinating topic. It features a variety of colourful characters and numerous tragic moments. In any other film made by any other director, this would have been highlighted more. Both Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong would have received top billing in a buddy kind of way. First Man, however, is different. Instead of appealing to the core American audience who longs to see Americans being flawless, macho, flag-planting individuals, and thus giving the space race its very own Bohemian Rhapsody, Chazelle tells the universal story of grief through a father who leaves our atmosphere in an attempt to understand and accept the death of his 2-year-old daughter. Before the death of Karen, Neil's daughter, we watch as the character obsesses over her condition. He spends hours on the phone talking to various doctors, writing down everything he can in order to understand what she's going through, and how he can stop it. As one doctor states,
"I'm sorry, Neil. I wish I had more to offer."
Upon hearing this, instead of breaking down and getting upset, Armstrong remains oddly cheerful, hiding his inner emotion. Before he hangs up on the doctor, he doesn't forget to ask how his wife is doing.
Give my love to June. Okay, bye now.
In one of the most heartbreaking smash cuts I have ever seen, we jump from Neil toying with Karen's hair to a funeral. Even here, Neil is not crying. His wife Janet is sobbing, but our stoic lead remains untouched. In order to fully express himself and the pain he's carrying with him, he has to lock himself in his study, literally closing off the outside world. Here, Chazelle critiques the American and male myth. He shows how Neil is forced to act by the society around him. He feels a great level of disgrace in being emotional and distraught, which is perfectly captured in the following scene, in which he tells his wife he's heading into work, a mere 24 hours after burying Karen. The subtle shock on Janet's face, but her reluctance to really question her husband's thought process is tragic. There's silence where there should really be a conversation. Even when Neil finds himself at his desk, his comrades just question his mental well-being.
You could take a few days off, you know. I know.
A little later in the film, Neil decides to put all his energy and frustration over Karen's passing into Project Gemini, where he spends the next 5 years of his life, from 1961 until 1966. He even goes so far as to hide Karen from his life altogether, throwing all his research and even his daughter's bracelet in a drawer, never to be seen again. Over the course of this period, Neil loses many friends to tragic accidents. The audience grows to understand how closely linked life and death really are. How you can be smiling and laughing one second and totally lifeless the next, which is exactly how Neil feels throughout this time. Just when Armstrong and his family are growing and you think they've started to accept and understand Karen's passing, the character is reminded of death and how unfair life can really be. When one of Neil's close friends, Elliot, tragically dies in a flight test, we watch as Neil hears this news. Instead of crying, Chazelle has an array of rain hail down, visually showing how Armstrong feels on the inside, but is unable to properly express externally. At Elliot's wake, Neil brushes past some guests and witnesses a vision of Karen, who's seen playing with some little girls. Here, Neil has a panic attack and rushes home, leaving Janet and his son at the wake. While we don't see Neil cry in the car on the way home, we can imagine this isolation is where he was finally able to express himself. What Chazelle continues to do here is portray Neil as an austere man, who is desperately trying to keep himself together at the expense of those around him. He's showing the pressure and long-term psychological damage that this restrained sense of emotion can really produce. Before Neil and Buzz head off to the moon, Janet forces Neil to tell his young sons that the mission he's about to begin could be rather costly. Neil is of course reluctant to tell his kids of the potential ramifications of Apollo 11. Through Janet, the film's source of expressed emotion, he does so. In this sequence, we witness the marital stress produced thanks to restraint emotions. Neil and Janet are both mourning and in deep and true pain, but only one of them is expressing that. The scene in which Neil opens up and tells his kids is incredibly awkward. Neil mentions being in quarantine. He states,
"What's quarantine?"
Be in isolation to protect in case we carry any diseases from the lunar surface or something of that nature. It's not likely, but it's a precaution.
What Chazelle is showing here, thanks to the perfectly placed shots of Neil's oldest son Eric and Janet, is how he truly feels. Neil has been in isolation for all these years, failing to acknowledge the fact that everyone around him, whether it be Janet or Eric, also have this disease. They're all mourning Karen in horrific ways, and the fact that no one has properly spoken about it is not helping. The crescendo of the film occurs when Neil and Buzz land on the moon. It's a beautiful moment that has been elegantly built towards over the past 2 hours. When Neil arrives on the moon, we witness the landscape from his perspective. It is eerie and yet beautiful. Justin Hurwitz's gorgeous, instantly memorable score sounds as Neil reminisces on the past and his life with Karen. Instead of making this moment about the United States or patriotism, Chazelle focuses on Neil and concludes his arc. A silly and out-of-nowhere moment where Neil plants the US flag on the moon's lunar surface is instead replaced with something so much more and actually built towards over the course of the movie. Neil approaches the Little West crater. He stands over it and once more flashes back to the past, something he's been unable to let go of. Neil opens his palm and reveals Karen's bracelet from earlier in the film. He holds it over the surface, struggling with the ramifications of this decision. Finally accepting Karen's death and realizing how special his life was with her, he lets go of the pain and regret. As the bracelet falls to the dark surface, Neil cries. This moment is truly the climax of the film. It's here that Chazelle succeeds in deconstructing the myth of Neil Armstrong. Instead of portraying him as an American hero, he portrays him as a man who lost his daughter and used that sadness to achieve something truly special.
Sees me down through the waves of the old ocean.
When Neil arrives back on Earth, he meets Janet in that previously mentioned quarantine. A sheet of glass separates the two of them, visually showing the divide between them over the course of the film. In this moment, with no dialogue at all, Neil apologizes for his inability to express his grief. He holds his hand up to the glass, and despite reluctance, Janet accepts his apology and places her palm over his, a sign that these two, all along, were feeling the same way. A quote from earlier in the movie actually comes to mind here.
I don't know what space exploration will uncover, but I don't think it'll be exploration just for the sake of exploration. It'll be more the fact that it allows us to see things maybe we should have seen a long time ago.
What we learned through this film and Chazelle's decision to deconstruct an American hero is that grief, sadness, and anger need to be expressed. In this film, Neil is indeed a living poster man of bygone American heroism, but the movie does not portray that in a positive light. It criticizes it and attacks it. It's through First Man that Chazelle proves that to grow as men, we need to be comfortable being honest with ourselves and those around us. Hi everyone, I'd just like to give a huge thank you for watching this video this week. So yeah, I'll be back in a few weeks' time with a video on Blade Runner 2049, another Ryan Gosling starring space sci-fi film in which he plays a sad man. So yeah, please be sure to subscribe and I'll see you then.